His instructor had a way of looking right through him, until the very day she chose to make him a spectacle, to shame him before the entire class. But the moment his music began to flow, the astonishment on her face was a story in itself, a shock she absolutely never anticipated. Leo Corbin was seated by the window, his pen drumming a steady, quiet rhythm against his notebook. This wasn't a display of nervousness. It was simply a custom, one his mother constantly urged him to abandon, but it was the very beat that helped his thoughts align. The classroom at Northwood Middle School in Cedar Creek, Ohio, was alive with the typical buzz of pre-lesson conversation. Yet Leo remained centered on the assignment laid out before him. He found satisfaction in completing tasks ahead of time. Ms. Evelyn Reed commanded the front of the classroom, her eyes gliding over her notes. She had been molding the minds of sixth graders for the better part of 15 years. And throughout that tenure, she had cultivated a certain image. Rigorous, but equitable. At least from the perspective of the students she happened to favor. Leo had never been counted among that chosen few. Her disdain was never overt. She never elevated her voice or directly insulted him, yet she consistently overlooked his raised hand. When he answered a question correctly, she would proceed swiftly. On the rare occasion he was wrong, she would pause, almost relishing the instance. Leo was aware of this, and so were some of his peers. "Dude, it's like she doesn't even see you," Noah Jensen, the boy in the adjacent seat, murmured one afternoon. "You've got some kind of teacher-proof invisibility cloak or what?" Leo had merely offered a shrug. "Suppose I do." But on this day, there was a palpable shift in the air. Ms. Reed's gaze drifted toward him more frequently than was customary, not in a manner that forewarned of discipline, but with something else entirely, a sense of expectation. The lesson commenced, a routine exploration of history, delving into the American Revolution. Leo meticulously took down notes, listening, anticipating the familiar cycle to play out. Then the unexpected occurred. "Leo," Ms. Reed's voice was sharp, "why don't you field this next question?" Head swiveled in his direction. Leo blinked, taken aback. She never singled him out. He straightened his posture, his eyes scanning the whiteboard. The crossing of the Delaware was a pivotal military maneuver designed to shatter the Hessian forces' morale and resources. She breathed. Not terrible at all." It was an answer straight from the textbook. A few students shared knowing looks. Noah sent him a glance that clearly asked, "What in the world was that?" The lesson progressed, but a fundamental change had taken place. Ms. Reed was no longer ignoring him. She was observing him. And then, in the final moments before the bell, she played her hand. "Leo," she called out as the other students started to gather their belongings, "please remain for a moment." A few heads turned once more, but no one uttered a word. Leo moved deliberately, stowing his notebook before walking to her desk. "I happened to overhear your conversation the other day," she stated, her hands clasped together. "Regarding your grandfather." Leo's brow furrowed. "What about him? You mentioned he was a musician." A certain quality in her voice made the atmosphere feel distinctly heavier. He gave a slight nod. "Yeah, he was. A pianist. He played blues." A faint curl formed on Ms. Reed's lips, not quite a smirk, but something uncomfortably close. "Fascinating." She settled back into her chair, her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the desk. "You must have inherited some of that talent." Leo hesitated, unsure of the direction this conversation was taking, but a sense of unease settled in. "A little," he conceded. Her smile broadened, but it held no warmth. "Good to know," the bell shrieked. Leo picked up his backpack and moved toward the exit, but her voice halted him. "Tomorrow," she declared, "we'll see what you're made of." He turned back. "What?" "The piano in the corner," she said, nodding toward the old, upright instrument that was slowly being consumed by dust in the back of the room. "You're going to play something for the class." Leo just stared at her. A handful of students who had lingered by the door now paused, their eyes darting between teacher and student. "Why?" Ms. Reed cocked her head as if the question itself was a source of amusement. "Why not? You said your grandfather played." "I'm certain a little of that gift runs in your veins." Leo recognized that tone perfectly. It wasn't interest, and it certainly wasn't encouragement. It was a trap, but he had no intention of backing away. Leo found little sleep that night. He lay awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, the exchange with Ms. Reed replaying endlessly in his mind. This was never a request. It was a dare, and he understood its nature precisely. She anticipated a failure, a public humiliation, a moment that would cement whatever preconceived notion she held of him. But there was a much larger story she was completely unaware of. The following morning, Leo entered the classroom shouldering a silent burden. The news had spread quickly. Whispers trailed him as he found his desk. "So you're really gonna play today?" Zane Petrov, one of the more boisterous students, smirked from the other side of the room. Leo offered no reply. "Didn't know you were a piano man," Noah murmured next to him. Leo kept his gaze locked on his notebook. "There are a lot of things people don't know." Ms. Reed made her entrance, placing her books on her desk with an unmistakable air of triumph. She paid little mind to the students finding their seats, her attention drifting to Leo before she initiated the day's lesson. The first portion of the class seemed to crawl by, but Leo barely registered any of it, his thoughts constantly leaping forward to the inevitable moment she would summon him. And then she did. "Well," she announced, closing her textbook and glancing at the wall clock, "it appears we have a bit of time before our next period begins." "Perfect." Her focus shifted to the old upright piano in the corner. "Leo, let's see what you can do." The very air in the room transformed. Students adjusted in their seats, some murmuring, others watching with keen intensity. Leo remained seated for a moment. He could feel the weight of every single eye upon him. His heartbeat wasn't rapid, but it was powerful, resolute. Then he rose to his feet. A few stifled laughs rippled across the room as he made his way to the piano. Someone muttered a comment he couldn't quite hear, but he didn't have to. The condescending tone was unmistakable. Ms. Reed clasped her hands together. "Play anything you wish." Leo examined the instrument. It was ancient, its keys a pale yellow from the passage of time, a few of them chipped along the edges. He gently brushed his fingers across them just once. The piano was out of tune, not drastically, but enough to be noticeable. He took a deep breath, sat down, and placed his hands on the keys. He knew precisely what piece he would perform. Just then he heard it. Someone trying to suppress a laugh from behind him. A snicker that was quiet, but crystal clear. This was no longer just about proving Ms. Reed wrong. It was about proving them all wrong. And he was about to do it in a way they would never see coming. The classroom had never known such a profound silence. Even Ms. Reed, who typically radiated an aura of smug confidence, now wore an expression of near curiosity. The students leaned in, waiting. Some were anticipating a catastrophe. Others were simply present for the show. Leo set his fingers on the keys. They felt right beneath his touch, even though this particular piano was a world away from the one at his home. His grandfather's piano was warm, cherished, with deep resonant tones that could fill a room with no effort. This one, its keys were somewhat rigid. The soundboard likely warped from years of being ignored. One deep breath, a single moment of pure stillness. And then he played. The opening notes floated through the room, gentle and unwavering, a bluesy progression of the sort his grandfather would play for hours on end during those sweltering Ohio afternoons. Leo's fingers moved with an innate confidence, rolling across the chords, his left hand marking the time as his right hand seemed to dance over the melody. The atmosphere in the classroom shifted again. The whispering ceased. The very students who had been smirking just moments before were now sitting perfectly still. Ms. Reed folded her arms, her brow creasing just a fraction. She had braced herself for fumbling, perhaps a nervous, shaky beginning. Instead, she was hearing something for which she was utterly unprepared. Leo didn't pause to gauge their reactions. He wasn't performing for them any longer. He was playing for himself, for the memory of his grandfather. He allowed himself to become lost in the music, feeling every note as if it were telling a story that only he could comprehend. His fingers moved with a fluid grace, striking a perfect equilibrium between technical precision and pure, unbridled emotion. This was more than skill. It was a dialogue between him and the instrument. And then he decided to escalate. He transitioned into a more intricate piece, letting his hands weave complex, rapid runs up and down the keyboard. A progression his grandfather had taught him, one that had taken him months of struggle to finally conquer. A deep, rolling bass line pulsed beneath a soaring lyrical melody, the notes clashing and resolving in a perfect, breathtaking harmony. The longer he played, the more profound the silence became. Its weight descended upon everyone in the room, enveloping them like the very music that filled the air. There was no laughter now. Noah, seated near the front, leaned forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. Zane, who had been joking earlier, still had his arms crossed, but the smirk was long gone. A few other students exchanged looks, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and something that looked a lot like respect. And then came the crescendo. Leo's fingers pressed down with force, striking chords that vibrated against the very walls. The music swelled, occupying every corner of the room, every quiet space where doubt had once taken root. He pushed even harder, letting the final, cascading run carry the weight of everything he had left unsaid. And then silence. The last note lingered in the air for a heartbeat before dissolving. Leo raised his hands, letting them rest in his lap for a second. No one moved. No one spoke. Then came a single, sharp clap from the back of the room. It was followed by another and then another. Within moments, the entire class was erupting in applause. Noah let out a quiet whistle. Damn! Zane, still with his arms folded, gave a slight shake of his head. I had no idea he could do that. Leo finally let out his breath, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from the raw energy of what had just transpired. He had done more than just play. He had fundamentally changed something. The applause grew louder, students looking at one another as if they had just been privy to something they were never meant to witness, something they would carry with them. But the most deafening silence of all came from Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed's expression was a mask, impossible to decipher. She remained by her desk, arms still folded, her lips forming a tight, thin line. The ovation continued around her, yet she was motionless. She had not uttered a single word. Leo sat quietly, his hands resting in his lap, breathing in and out. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't seeking validation. He simply allowed the moment to hang in the air, letting all of them absorb what had just taken place. Then at last, Ms. Reed found her voice. Well, she said, her tone clipped, that was unexpected. The clapping subsided as students glanced from her to Leo. A few still whispered with excitement, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted once more. This was no longer just about a performance. Where did you learn to play like that? She inquired, tilting her head slightly. Leo met her gaze directly, without flinching. My grandfather. Something flickered in her eyes, but it vanished too quickly to be identified. She straightened up. I see. A pause. Ms. Reed tapped her fingers on her desk, the only sound in the now hushed classroom. Then she addressed the rest of the students, as if physically shaking off whatever thought had just crossed her mind. All right, let's return to our lesson. But nobody moved. Leo looked around. Noah was still staring at him, eyebrows arched as if he couldn't process what he had just witnessed. A girl in the back, Chloe Navarro, seemed almost frustrated, as if a powerful moment had been prematurely stolen from them. Zane scoffed quietly. That's it? Ms. Reed's eyes shot toward him. Pardon me? Zane shrugged, shifting in his seat. I mean, that's all you're going to say? He just played like... He gestured with his hands. Like something you'd hear on the radio. And you're just... moving on? A few heads nodded in agreement. Ms. Reed's mouth tightened. This is a history class, not a recital. Leo took a breath, centering himself. You didn't think I could play, did you? Her eyes darted back to him, sharp, appraising. He held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. That's the real reason you called me up here. A few murmurs rippled through the student body. Ms. Reed released a slow breath. I was simply providing you with an opportunity to share your abilities with the class. Leo shook his head. No, you weren't. His voice was steady, even. You expected me to fail. That's why you chose me. The whispers grew louder. Ms. Reed's fingers curled at the edge of her desk. That's enough, Leo. But he wasn't finished. You wouldn't have called on Noah, he went on, glancing at his friend, or Chloe, or Zane, but you called on me. Why? The room seemed to be holding its collective breath. A muscle twitched in Ms. Reed's jaw. You are overstepping. I don't believe I am. Her eyes grew hard, her posture rigid. Sit down. For the first time that year, Leo didn't comply immediately. He scanned the room, his eyes moving over his classmates, the ones who had ignored him, the ones who had misjudged him, the ones who had snickered when she had called his name. Then deliberately he stood up. The silence now felt heavier, charged with tension, and Ms. Reed, for all her practiced composure, looked undeniably shaken. But for this moment, she was no longer the one in command of the room. Leo walked back to his desk slowly, feeling the gravity of each footstep. His heart was no longer racing. He wasn't afraid. If anything, a peculiar sense of peace had washed over him. He sank into his chair, still feeling the gazes from every direction. Noah offered him a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that required no words. Chloe was still observing Ms. Reed, arms folded, as if she were anticipating something more. But Ms. Reed had already turned away. She flipped open her lesson planner, her eyes locked on the page as though she could will the preceding events out of existence. Let's continue. The room did not return to its normal state as quickly as she had hoped. The energy lingered. People continued to whisper. This was about more than just the music now. Zane leaned back, arms crossed. Kinda strange how you don't want to talk about it. Ms. Reed's head snapped up. Excuse me? Zane shrugged again. You made a huge deal about him playing, but now you're pretending it didn't even happen. A few quiet sounds of agreement echoed in the room. Ms. Reed's grip on her book tightened. That is enough. But Leo had witnessed it. The hesitation, the unease, and so had everybody else. For the remainder of the period, Ms. Reed's typical authority felt fragile, like a pane of glass that had just been spiderwebbed with cracks. She still directed the lesson, but the students were no longer as receptive. The familiar classroom rhythm had been broken. When the bell finally shrilled, chairs scraped loudly against the floor as students gathered their belongings, talking amongst themselves as they headed for the door. Leo slung his backpack over his shoulder and started to leave, but just as he reached the threshold, Ms. Reed called his name. Leo. He paused and turned back. For a brief second, she looked as if she might say something genuine, something real. Instead, her expression became rigid. I trust you understand that this is still my classroom. Leo regarded her for a moment, then, in the same calm, unwavering voice he had used earlier, he replied, I know. A beat of silence hung between them before he walked out. In the corridor, Noah jogged to catch up with him. Bro, what was that? He shook his head, a wide grin spreading across his face. You just turned everything completely upside down. Leo finally let out a long breath. Yeah? Noah bumped his shoulder. So you gonna play for us again? Leo considered it, thinking about the feel of the keys under his fingertips, the sensation of the music filling the space around him. He smiled. Yeah, I think I will. Because today he hadn't just played a song, he had finally been heard. Leo walked home that afternoon with a new lightness in his step. The sun was low over Elmwood Avenue, painting long shadows on the sidewalk as he navigated the familiar path. The pressure he had been carrying since the previous day, the anxiety, the uncertainty, had vanished. At the small corner market near his house, he stopped for a bottle of water. Mr. Alistair Finch, the elderly man who ran the shop, observed him with an insightful gaze. You look like a young man who just accomplished something significant. Leo paused, then smiled. Maybe I did. By the time he arrived home, the aroma of fried chicken and baked macaroni filled the house. His mother stood at the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot. You're getting in late. Leo set his bag down by the entrance and took a seat at the kitchen table. It was a long day. His mother glanced back at him. A good long day or a bad one? He thought about it, about the way the entire class had gone silent, the look in Ms. Reed's eyes, the way his classmates now saw him in a completely new light, truly saw him for the very first time. Good, he said at last. Really good. She switched off the stove, wiped her hands on a towel, and sat down across from him. Do you want to tell me about it? Leo nodded, and for the next 15 minutes, he recounted the entire story. She never interrupted, never hurried him. She just listened, her expression moving from concern to pride, and then to something softer, almost sorrowful. When he had finished, she let out a slow breath. "It sounds like you made her face something uncomfortable." "I think I did." She looked at him closely. "And how does that make you feel?" He didn't need to consider it for long. Like it was exactly what needed to happen. His mother smiled, reaching over the table to give his hand a gentle squeeze. "Good." The next day at school, things felt different, not in a dramatic, obvious way. Ms. Reed still conducted her class as she always had, still called upon the usual students, still behaved as though nothing had changed. But the undercurrent in the room had shifted. The students perceived her differently now, and they perceived Leo differently too. At lunchtime, a few kids who had never given him a second glance before stopped by his table. "Dude, you were unbelievable on that piano," Chloe said, taking a seat opposite him. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 5. Noah shook his head in amazement. "Man, you've been holding out on us." Leo smirked. "I guess so." From the other side of the bustling cafeteria, Ms. Reed walked by, tray in hand. Their eyes connected for a fleeting moment. This time, she was the one who looked away first. And Leo, he simply continued with his lunch, because he had already communicated everything he needed to say. Some truths are not learned from textbooks. Some moments alter the way people view their world, whether they are ready for the change or not. Ms. Reed had spent an entire year looking past Leo, and in the span of just a few minutes, he had guaranteed she would never make that mistake again. Perhaps she would never acknowledge it verbally. Perhaps she would never concede what she had done, what she had wrongfully presumed. But it no longer mattered, because now, Leo understood something she did not. When people attempt to make you invisible, when they try to diminish you, the most powerful response you can offer is to let your own talent roar louder than their prejudice. And when you do, they are left with no choice but to listen. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the most profound stories are the ones that remind us to stand in our own power, regardless of who is watching.